I think my juices flow all the time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know as much as I know.
Right now, we've been able to stuff the stuff.
The curse is broken. NC State fans, finally. Finally.
Hey, happy Thanksgiving.
I mean, that's a triple play.
The Wolfpack ain't for soft. It ain't for soft people.
I asked the question before NC State's game in the Pop Tarts Bowl on Thursday against Kansas State. Can NC State have nice things? I promised on this podcast we would answer the question, can NC State have nice things? And the next day, the morning after, NC State loses to Kansas State 28-19. Welcome to Law of the Wolf. My name is Joe Giglio. I am joined today by Jacey Zembal, Wolfpack Central, NC State rivals. And JC, you and I had a phone conversation yesterday, and you used the word with NC State that you cannot use, which is should. That given the number of people who are sitting out for Kansas State, given the motivation that NC State should have to get to that 10th win for only the second time in school history, that NC State should win the football game. And I didn't have a great retort for you. And I really wasn't going off of even my own Law of the Wolf. But what I was thinking of, I got a quick anecdote for you. That since the win over Carolina to close out the regular season, I don't love the way that NC State has been presenting themselves, NC State football. I don't love the way that they've been kind of acting and fronting. I don't like that. And it reminded me of my mentor, George Tarantini. You remember the year after NC State baseball went to the College World Series with Trey Turner and Carlos Rodon?
No, I know that team well.
Okay. So George and Elliot Avent, NC State's baseball coach, are very good friends. And the next year after State goes to the College World Series, they come back. Everybody comes back. They had, what was it, like a press conference type of deal at Backyard Bistro. And there was a lot of talk about getting back and winning the championship and unfinished business and all this other stuff. It was very cocky is what it was. It was very confident. And I remember George saying to me, I don't like that. That's not who we are. That's not who we are. And I the whole comments in the locker room by Dave Doran, a lot of the talk about him being the bully now, getting a player to flip from Carolina, getting a transfer from Duke, getting a transfer from Wake Forest. And, there was a lot of chest puffing that I thought was performative since the Carolina game. Now, when you beat Carolina, you earn the right to talk trash in that particular rivalry. So don't get me wrong. But I took it as I could hear George in my head. That's not who we are. And I got those vibes since the Carolina game and into the run up. And you had asked Dave about the Pop Tart flavor, and he's going to drink his bourbon and all this other stuff. And it was made for good theater, of course. But the problem there is you can't put the cart before the horse. You got to win the football game. Then you can have the celebratory bourbon. Then you can have the celebratory Pop Tart. But not before. Don't dump the Gatorade before. And I felt there was a little bit of that going on before this game. Are you down with? Are you picking up what I'm putting down right now?
No, I know what you're saying because I thought about it a little, but I kind of came from the viewpoint of, and maybe this is one of the one downfall of having the UNC game as the end of the season game, is that in a norm, if there was like the 8th week or 9th week, then they would have to play the next week, and
right?
Put the hype of the UNC win away. But I really felt like NC State had graduated long time ago from that brutal pattern where, whatever you want to call it, handling prosperity or reading your press.
Yeah. Yes.
And I did think about it this month. I mean, it was a full month of celebratory mode. Now, I also recognize that probably in the month of December, which is now unlike any other time period in the history of college football, that there's so many other things going on that it makes you wonder how much does the bowl game fit into the pie chart.
Yeah.
I mean, they're trying to form their roster for next year. I mean, as many have pointed out, you imagine an NFL team doing free agency around like week 14.
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially what's going on is they're building the roster for next year while trying to prepare for a bowl game. And I don't know how much, so I wonder how much that kind of played a role too, which, that first series, they got punched in the mouth, weren't ready to play. We watched UNC first play of the game, 75-yard touchdown for West Virginia. I mean, you could see see certain trends. Even the Oklahoma-Arizona game, right away, Oklahoma throws really bad interception. And some teams are ready to roll in that first quarter, and some teams look like they haven't played in 4 weeks. And I wonder if that really caught up to them on that first drive. And I don't know. I'm sure you did not pour through the press conference quotes, but the running back for Kansas State basically said very bluntly how much they practiced that pass play to him, how they knew that call was coming from the NC State defense, that they were ready. Yeah. And sure enough, 37-yard touchdown. So, as you like to point out, other teams scout too.
Yeah. Other teams have good players. And I do want to get into Kansas State and how I was impressed with what they did. But first, I want to continue on a point that you bring up that is the one that I actually thought about last night. And Dave Doran in 11 years has now proven, and even let's just take this year, he has proven that when you doubt them, and he has proven when you diss them, that he can and he has proven after they play poorly, he will have his football team ready to respond. He will have his football team ready to bounce back. He has unequivocally proven that. You go back to the Duke game this year, they bounce back the way that they did. You go back to any number of games throughout his tenure, and the biggest strength that he has is when they are doubted, they play their best football. Yeah. What he needs to do now is figure out how to play their best football when they're happy.
Yeah.
Because they were happy after the Carolina game, and they should have been. And it wasn't just the Carolina game. I want to stress that. To close the season the way that they did with the 5 wins, to respond the way that they did after the Duke loss was tremendous. And it wasn't just the Carolina game, but there was also a very specific way that they had to play football in those 5 games. Never trailing, always getting out in front, playing smart, causing turnovers, not beating themselves with either turnovers or penalties, and then really riding Kevin Concepcion. And there was a formula there. And the other really big part of that formula was Payton Wilson. We're going to get into Payton Wilson too. But I want to pull this up. This is from 2018.
Okay.
And NC State the week before had lost to Wake Forest. This is the famous Jamie Newman game.
Yes.
Okay. NC State loses to Wake Forest. They were number 13 in the college football playoff that year. If they had won out, which they should have done by all means, if they had won out, A, they would have won 10 games. B, it was a year where the ACC champion Clemson would have been in the playoff, and they would have qualified for a New Year's 6 bowl based on their CFP ranking. So there was a lot in front of that team in 2018. Okay. They lose to Wake Forest at home as a 3-touchdown favorite to Jamie Newman. This, kind of you knew who he was, but no one else knew who the heck that kid was. He comes in, leads a 4th quarter comeback for Wake Forest. The very next week, they go to Louisville, and they absolutely put it on a terrible Louisville team that had quit on the season. Leave no doubt about that, okay? But this comment from Dave Doran is what I want him to think about this offseason, because I do believe it is still the hurdle for him in this program.
As a program, I feel like right now, when we have adversity, we respond really well. When people don't respect us, we respond really well. People talk bad about us, we respond really well. But we still haven't learned how to handle success. Like, that's the next thing in our program. And the 2 games that we didn't play the way I thought we could, Clemson and Wake, those were the weeks where we were getting this. The attaboys all week. And that's something I've got to get better at helping them with, obviously, as their head coach, and getting them to block the noise.
So there it is, JC. That's from 2018. We haven't learned how to handle success. I'm not dancing on anybody's grave. I'm not celebrating that they lost. I'm just pointing out, to me, what I thought was the biggest issue last night, other than Payton Wilson not playing in the football game. So What do you think?
I mean,
Still,
you could go.
those words still ring true though, right? Here in 2023.
Well, I think we could go right back to the East Carolina game last year in the opener, which obviously they won, but it was the saddest winning team in the history of NC State football. But what happened that entire offseason? Devin Leary for Heisman.
Everybody
This
was
is the best team in the history of the world, right?
patting them on the back. Yeah, you're right.
And it was an interesting dynamic too, because I always thought it was a very subtle but strong shift that Dave had, and maybe he never really has talked about this, but he downplayed expectations that spring until one night when the ESPN cameras got him for an interview when Ike Ekwonu got drafted. And whatever it was about that big spotlight, that's the night that he turned it up.
Yeah.
Because he didn't talk that way in his opening spring press conference or whatever media availabilities he had leading up to draft night. And then all of a sudden, NC State, has a chance to be this and that. And, the hype machine rolled on the entire offseason from that night on. Now, this year's team had no hype.
Right.
There was hope. Pac fans are always hopeful, but there was no delusions of grandeur about this year's squad. And really the only offseason hype was, well, Brendan Armstrong is going to be 2021, the sequel.
Back with Robert and I, yeah.
Just because he's back with his offensive coordinator. Forget the fact that that Virginia team had pros all around them, or potential pros around them at the skill position spots. So, that was like the big difference. So, in the way they started this year, there was no reason for prosperity.
No.
So I don't know. I don't think really Pac fans even relaxed until maybe after the Virginia Tech game.
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of cockiness going into UNC more than normal, but I think you hit it on the nose. And usually we see it more. We see the song and dance with handling prosperity where it bounces back between NC State football or NC State basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's always been uncanny that as soon as NC State football gets ranked, then they lose the next week.
Right.
Or, that type of stuff. We've seen that song and dance for a very long time. I just thought that because of the point you made that Dave never really lets one loss turn into two, that they kind of had turned that corner.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they heard the talk about all the players that were missing for Kansas State. They have no idea.
How do you avoid that? Yeah.
Why would they? I can't see a lot of the NC State players sticking around with their free time watching a random Big 12 game. So they probably didn't know much about Kansas State. Just whatever their coaches tell them, whatever video clips they get shown. I'm sure they had the idea of like, oh, this could be easy. We're rolling.
Right.
Everything about this is setting up our way. And it truly was. I mean, when you really think about it going into that game, every advantage that State could have up until the point where Payton Wilson opted out, everything was really smelling roses for NC State. The portal, yeah, CJ Clark was a loss. I don't think they lost the game last night because they didn't have CJ Clark at nose tackle for his 30 snaps. But, they didn't lose like significant players in the portal. They didn't lose anybody on their staff. They didn't have any, jarring situations. I mean, Kansas State lost their quarterback in a sport where the quarterback is everything for some of these schools. And not just like a quarterback who'd just been there a little bit. I mean, he was a fifth-year guy. And there's a reason why Ohio State and USC are willing to shell out major money for Will Howard. But as you pointed out, true freshman comes in, hadn't started before.
Well, let's not jump the gun. Let's get into Kansas State here. Hang on one second.
Housekeeping.
Big shots to my man Hayes Lancaster. He was down at the game last night. Got a call from my wife yesterday around lunchtime. Hey, there's ants next to the sink in the house. Can you call Mosquito Authority? And I was like, yes, I'm on it. They're out at my place this morning. So Mosquito Authority, Pest Authority, ants, termites, mice, moisture underneath the house, you name it. Go to bugsbite.com and you'll see all kinds of different ways to save. Hayes does not believe in contracts, but he does believe in saving you money. So go to bugsbite.com. Speaking of saving money, your house is your number one investment I don't know why you would want to mess around with some sort of national chain that wants to give you some lowball offer. Don't do that to yourself. Hometown Realty is local. They have 6 locations from here to the coast. They have more than 250 agents. More than 60% of their business is in new construction. Why do you want to be in new construction? Because those builders have incentives for you to go with them. You're not going to get those incentives off the street. You're not going to get those incentives going with some national chain. Go local. Go with Hometown Realty. It's myhtr.com. And then coming up, JC, you should be excited about this. I think you're a Super Tecmo guy, Nintendo guy. We're going to have a Super Tecmo Bowl tournament at Shady's in Garner. Shady's is owned by Josh Whitaker. Josh Whitaker, big NC State fan. Whitaker and Hamer for all of your law needs. Go to the world's greatest URL. It's wh.lawyer. That's wh.lawyer. If you're like me, you got a traffic ticket that needs taken care of. Maybe you're selling a business or closing on a home. All of those good things. Any law need, any kind of law need you have, go to wh.lawyer. All right, let's digest a little bit of what we actually saw in the game last night. Kansas State jumps out to a 21-7 lead. They end up winning the game 28-19. And honestly, my number one takeaway, JC, in the first half of that game, which is where I think it was won, was Kansas State's offensive line is really good. And Avery Johnson is a true freshman, correct? True freshman in his first college start against a really good defense, even without Payton Wilson, was poised as hell. Like, he didn't make mistakes. He bought time with his feet. He ran when it was time to run. He took shots when it was time to take shots. But even Andre Ware during the broadcast was talking a lot about how, and Anish Sharaf, we're talking about his ability to just throw the ball away and live to see another down. So he ends up only completing 14 of 31 passes, but for 178 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. And then he ran 7 times for 71 yards and a score. I mean, I was really impressed with Avery Johnson, JC. You mentioned Will Howard. I mean, I would expect USC to have a really good backup quarterback, right? I would expect Alabama, Georgia, all of these, schools, Texas Tech even. I would not have come up with Kansas State having, what was he, the third ranked quarterback in his class?
He was the number 1 dual threat back in the class of 2023 by Rivals.com.
Okay.
He was a big deal. He is the only player on their roster that was a 4-star recruit.
That's wild.
They actually had another 4-star player who transferred out, who was the backup quarterback. And then they have a 4-star quarterback coming in next year.
Wow.
So they know how to recruit quarterbacks. There's no question on that. And I knew going into the game, he was going to be good. I just didn't know if he'd be good against NC State in his first start. There's a learning curve typically. And I don't know if you've heard this before, but if you don't turn the ball over, control time of possession, sneak a big play here and there, like say a fake punt, and then rely on your defense, it could be a winning formula. And I actually said it before the game that Kansas State and NC State were going to try to play the same way, except State's been doing it for 5 weeks, where Kansas State has to do it for the first time this season because they had a higher ceiling during the regular season with their full complement of players. They didn't have the same ceiling last night, but what did they do? They didn't make any mistakes. They had a couple false start penalties that were ill-timed at one point. There was obviously some stretches of time where neither team could move the ball, but it was like, and you could even make the case that both teams were playing not to make that one big crucial mistake.
Yeah.
Not make that one killer turnover, that one killer interception. But that's how NC State's played for 5 weeks. And that's how Kansas State, I think, adopted to play last night. And you mentioned offensive line. I mean, we're talking about 4 6-year seniors maybe and a redshirt junior. Massive amount of experience.
That was an old school Jim Grobe, Wake Forest kind of offensive line.
I
mean, the only mistake I thought Kansas State made all night, JC, was how do you fall for a fake punt after you pulled off a fake? Like, that doesn't make any sense. You should be on high alert, especially in a bowl game. But that was the only mistake I thought they made all night. They went
gave up
for
the
it
one
when they
big
needed to
catch
go
to
for it.
Concepcion.
What's that about Concepcion?
They had the one big catch that Concepcion had for 40.
Yeah.
Gave up the fake punt. They almost. I mean, they had the two penalties that wiped out the punt return touchdown and the flanker screen touchdown.
The flanker screen was questionable. The punt one, the guy did grab his jersey, so I could see the flag there.
I mean, you could, but I mean, it you have to like their sound, the soundness of how they played. You know, that you know, it's a rare situation where a left guard is like the star of a team.
Yeah.
I mean, they love Cooper Beebe. Love him. You know, and everybody, I mean, 2-star recruit coming out of high school, you know, one of the 3 Kansas natives on the O-line. The other 2 linemen are from Texas. You know, like I said, this is not a roster full of like highly touted guys. One of the good linebackers was a walk-on, you know, but man, I mean, you could see why their coach won 10 games a year ago at a school that, you know, has not had any success unless Bill Snyder has been the coach, and won 4 out of 5 years national titles at North Dakota State. I mean, this is a coach's coach. And I thought it was interesting because I believe they said during the broadcast that Kansas State coaches visited with NC State.
Yeah, for their defense.
Yeah. And then sure enough, they knew exactly what the defense was going to do on the 37-yard touchdown catch by the running back, who's a very good running back. I mean, I had told you before the game, I was impressed with what he could do. He's very slippery. He's tough. And he's going to be an NFL running back.
Yeah, 28 carries, 151 yards.
He's a workhorse.
The score. Yeah.
In an era where backs never get more than 15 carries, it seems like. You know, here's a guy who was a true bell cow behind a big offensive line, and they just did it enough in the passing game to get what they needed done.
It's funny. I began the year talking about Robert and I and how Tim Beck's teams never scored on the opening drive. Kansas State scored on their opening drive this year 10 times out of 14 games. They went 9-1 when they scored first in the football game. I believe 7 of the 10 were touchdowns. Like, what? That's fairly impressive. So I honestly, what I took away early in that game, I was like, okay, Kansas State showed up. That this wasn't like Kansas State's going to roll over. This wasn't all these guys are not playing. They don't have any talent. Like we've watched a couple of bowl games where I'm like, I will be interesting to see what Florida State and Georgia look like. Of course, you'd think Georgia's backups are pretty good. If Kansas State's backups are good, you would think Georgia's backups are pretty good. I did not know what to expect from Kansas State, other than I did think Giddens would be I thought they would probably pull a Kevin Concepcion and just give Giddens the ball as much as they could. And with 28 carries, pretty close to it. Yeah. But I thought Johnson in particular, the poise for someone in his first start, and when you have that kind of recruiting ballyhoo behind you, you would have this. You have the kind of pressure on you that you want to impress people. And for him to play the way that he did and not try to impress, not try to overdo it, take what NC State's defense was giving them. Now, State's defense, I thought was much better in the second half, and that'll get us into this second part of this existential conversation. I had asked on Twitter, how much would you pay Payton Wilson to play in the second half of this football game? I'm not going to lie to you, JC. I was surprised that Payton Wilson, NC State's 6th-year linebacker, decided not to play in this football game. And I get it now in the world of opt-outs and all this other stuff, that it's not cool to question when a guy opts out. And I get it when a guy's a first-round pick. I really do. Even a second-round pick. I'm not sure that's Payton's future here in the draft. And what surprises me about it, JC, was he's a guy clearly cares about his legacy at NC State. Clearly. And he wants to be, for the lack of a better term, on the Mount Rushmore of NC State football. What better way to get there than to do something only one other team in school history has done and win the 10th game? Obviously I can't say definitively they would have won the football game if Payton Wilson played, but that last drive while NC State was down 2, They go 15 plays, 72 yards, convert 3 times on third down and once on fourth. JC, I got to be honest with you, man. I feel like if Payton's at least on the field, the drive doesn't look like that, or it ends in a field goal, right? Or am I putting too much on this? Am I missing something here? Am I not allowed to question why a guy didn't play? But it, quite frankly, he's not a first round pick. If you're a first round pick, I get it. I totally get it. This would have been I think he always he'll have all the accolades that he has, but now you're kind of I don't know. It feels like it was a missed opportunity, and I don't want to pin all of that on him, but he was so much a part of what this team was. As you pointed out, the leadership after the Brennan Armstrong booing, just the leadership after the Duke game to get the defense to a cohesive group, him and Tony Gibson, obviously. But, that's a lot of that's on Payton Wilson. And then to not have him in this football game, it just felt like to me, like it was like a gaping hole. It's just in their identity.
One of the things I thought was interesting is, a lot of the media go to a website that has, the running stats.
Yeah.
And there was a point in the game where like the top 3 tacklers for NC State, and maybe they finished all in the same order, but there was a point in the game where the top 3 tacklers were all secondary guys. You expect Jalen Scott to have a big game, in his way. He's actually had a terrific senior year. Been overlooked because of the dominance of Payton Wilson, but Jalen Scott's had a very quality senior year, which was unexpected if someone had asked, say, in August. They obviously have been trumpeting Caden Fordham's development all season long. Devin Betty is a vet. So you have 3 guys that are clearly experienced. So you would think that it wouldn't be a big glaring drop off. And I do think they settled in after that first drive. Maybe Payton Wilson's on, punt return coverage and they don't do the fake punt as well. If he's out there, who knows? Maybe Payton Wilson would have hit the 52-yard field goal because he could kick too. It kind of got to that point last night where after everything went wrong against NC State, it was Payton Wilson would have solved it. But at some point, they knew that he wasn't going to play in the game and that they had to turn that page. And as I pointed out, they played pretty much the entire 2021 season without Payton Wilson due to injury. So it's not like Tony Gibson doesn't know how to game plan a little differently when Payton's not in the lineup. Critics will say, well, they also had Isaiah Moore and Drake Thomas.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Isaiah Moore got hurt in the 7th game that year, I believe, against Miami. So, it's not their first rodeo in terms of shuffling things around because of injuries at linebacker or to star linebackers. But it's a great what if. I would argue that losing your quarterback is also incredibly important.
Yeah, but that's the flip side. I get that they didn't have players. I totally get that part of it.
I think that's just college football, though, in 2023 until they move the bowl games to August.
They should follow the Giglio plan for sure. I'm ready for them to do that.
Imagine what Florida State Georgia would be like to open the season in August.
Hey, I don't think anybody would opt out of that one. That's for sure. But I feel like we're a little bit a ways away.
I mean, they obviously miss Payton Wilson, and he was the safety net. People like to point out to the big plays. I look at him as the guy who makes sure that the 5-yard run stays at 5 yards.
Yeah.
That he makes sure that things don't go even more sideways. Now, it's not to say that the defense has been perfect all season long. We've seen the breakdowns. But I thought they played, once they settled in after that first drive, I thought they played the way they were supposed to play.
They were good in the second half. That last drive in particular.
Well, that I don't know how much you listened to Dave after the game, but he harped on that drive more than anything. He said they came out flat. He admitted it.
Yeah.
Choice words at halftime. But he thought that defensively they were pretty good in the second half until that final drive. And, it shows you how in tune he is. He quickly pointed out that they converted 3 third downs and a 4th down, which I think he basically called a third down. But, essentially they went I think Kansas State went 4 for 15 on third down conversions. 3 of them happened on that drive.
Yeah.
And then
And after
fourth
getting the
down,
2 penalties to wipe out a touchdown on the same drive and all the time.
Raheem Battle gets the pass interference penalty that extended it. Otherwise, it would have ended on that play.
Sure.
You know,
He grabbed
I've
him.
never seen a team run 7.5 minutes off on a clock in college football. I mean, that's an extraordinary amount of time off the clock. And, you know, but that just shows that Kansas State was the better team when it was winning time.
Yeah.
And they made the plays that they needed to make. And, you know, there's no doubt in my mind they were the better team last night. I thought it was pretty impressive that State made it to 21-19. I thought they should have kicked the field goal instead of going for it on fourth down in the first half, because I'm old school. You take the points when you get the points, because I didn't think it was going to be a high scoring game.
Agree.
It'd be a close game.
Yeah.
But, you know, but they bypassed the 3 points, you know, but Dave has been very consistent about that. He loves to say that he has confidence in his offensive line, but, you know, those 3 points would have been huge, you know, in retrospect. But at the end of, you know, it's just kind of, to me, it had to be very frustrating for them. And maybe the goal is not to be in a bowl game where, you know, mayo gets doused or Pop Tarts get eaten, or, you know, that they got to go somewhere where they could actually just have a normal post game celebration and not have to worry about, you know, if bourbon's going to be ready, or, you know, if mayo's going to be behind the ears and in the hair for the next 3 days. And I mean, it's amazing how some of this stuff has almost overshadowed the game. I mean, the social media for these bowl games is just off the charts, almost better than the games itself for some of them.
You could make the argument. Since you're my number one breeze through convert, I should just really have you do the breeze through ad, because you have the tumbler with the lifetime refills, because you are over at PNC Arena and Carter Finley Stadium all year long. And it is a great thing to have. But yeah, all of your snack needs, tailgate needs, beverage needs, coffee needs. You're not a coffee guy. I am a coffee guy. They have great dark roast over at the Breeze Through. 17 locations here in the state of North Carolina, including the Taj Mahal in Cary. Adam's going to have us over at the one in Cary on High House there. So we'll make sure we do that in 2024. But we appreciate Breeze Through here on this program for always taking care of us. And speaking of people who always take care of us, Anthony Guerra over at Oakwood Pizza Box, best pizza not only in Raleigh, but in the state of North Carolina. Our guy, Brad Frederick, UNC on the UNC basketball staff. Was it Drake Powell? Is that the kid's name out in Pittsburgh? Yeah. He was out in Broughton. Brad was over in Broughton this week. And so he's like, hey, I'm going over to Oakwood. And I said, yeah. He's like, what should I get? I go, get the square. He got the square. He was like, that thing was really, really good. I said, yeah, man, I'm not going to lie to you. If we're talking about food recommendations, you should listen to the OG. And it's not food, but one of the great things I've seen during this holiday season is the number of people who listen to this podcast who are like, hey, I'm not suggesting that you finally convinced my wife to help me on Christmas, but if you go to Home Field Apparel and use the promo code OG23, you can save 15% on this jacket, which I saw at least 3 people tweet at me and say basically thank you, because oh man, come on, I had this whole thing set up and now you want to do this to me. They're like, thank you, because this jacket, the bomber jacket, as you can see with the slobbering wolf and then Wolfpack on the back, at least 3 times I saw this was the highlight of my Christmas from Home Field Apparel. You can make it the highlight of your post Christmas. Get that thing ready for basketball season. Go to homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code OG23 and you can save 15%. All right, JC. So now 9-4 is how this year ends in football. They say goodbye to Payton Wilson, and who is one of the greats to ever play for the Wolfpack. Again, I'm a little bit confused as to why he did not play in the bowl game. I think it really could have put him on that level with Torrey Holt and Phillip Rivers and Ted Brown and a Jim Richer that, there might be someone else who wears the number 11, but you're him. That's it. they're going to look a little bit different next year. Obviously, they went into the portal. They did really well. We've talked about that in the previous episode. Their schedule next year is very manageable, other than a trip to Clemson and a neutral site game against Tennessee, where in Charlotte, where they haven't won since beating Louisville there in the Meineke Car Care Bowl.
Teddy Bridgewater's freshman year.
No, it's the Belk Bowl at that point. Yeah. So it's been a minute. They've lost these games, these neutral site games. I think the loss, in addition to taking away from the accomplishment of getting to the 10th win, and in my opinion, the 10th win is important because every other freaking team not named Virginia has a 10-win season since NC State's last one and only one in 2002. Like, it's kind of like the division title, conference title thing. Like, it just doesn't make any sense that you haven't done it. So there's something to that. But I also think, like, when you don't win that game, you don't go into the offseason with the same kind of mojo. I get it. The bowls or whatever they are now. But there is still something to finishing 10-3 and having 65 people next August fill out a ballot and say, oh, they won 10 games last year. Oh, they have Grayson McCall. Oh, they did well in the portal. Oh, this is a defense that has been in the top 25 the last, 3 years in a row, 4 years in a row. You know, those are all things that kind of run through a voter's mind in a playoff era. And you might say, well, the polls don't matter, but the polls are usually in line with how the College Football Playoff Selection Committee views the teams. And I can't help but think by losing the game, you put yourself back in this offseason where it's, you know, I think if you win the game, you're probably in a position where you start next year, top 20, top 15. I think now they're in a position where they'll probably be a fringe top 25 team. And maybe it's a good time to review the name of this podcast is The Law of the Wolf, because when you expect the most, you get the least. And when you expect the least, you get the most. So maybe there is something to that for NC State, that they won't have all of the expectations. And as we've proven, they can't handle. So maybe there is something, if you want to be a negative bright side on that one. But I do think this hurts them in their offseason momentum, JC, don't you?
I think it stings, but then I think there's a certain point, say maybe 3-4 weeks from now, where life just goes on.
Yeah.
The news cycle just is so fast these days. I think the biggest thing to me for this offseason is to get the offense to join the modern era.
Agreed.
So if everything this offseason can get NC State to be a modern offense again with 4 or 5 weapons, you know, in a sport where you almost have to have 3 very good wide receivers. You know, I always felt that a pivotal moment in college football, and I'll go all history on you, Joe, is when Steve Spurrier had Jaquez Green, Riedel Anthony, and Ike Hilliard. And that was like mind-blowing at that time in the 90s. And Miami had Kevin Williams, who was one of the most electrifying punt returner, slot receivers, ended up with the Cowboys. And they had, you know, 2 other great receivers to go with them. All of a sudden, it was like, hey, wait a minute. Like, we have a safety guarding a slot receiver? Oh, my, you know, or whatever. And then, obviously, it's now really become 4 wide receivers are mostly out there on the field. You know, State had Kevin Concepcion. You know, and then maybe they threw a couple passes to Dakari Collins. I mean, it was, you know, it was a really bizarre way of running the offense, but they had to do it. I mean, I don't think we'll ever see a team where the quarterback will run 20 plus times again. You know, I don't think Grayson McCall is built to run 20 plus times next year. And I don't think Cedric Bailey, if he's the quarterback of the future, is built to run 20 times. So, you know, they had to do what they did. You know, you and I have talked about it. I related it to the TJ Warren game plan of we will get him 30 every single game for the next 10 games because it's our only chance of getting to the state tournament.
Hey, they had to play that way. Yeah, they had to play that way. Yeah.
And you and I both point, you know, working back to what you said earlier, you know how much they trailed during the 5-game winning streak?
Did they at all?
3-0 against Miami.
Oh.
That's it.
Yeah.
You know, this was a wishbone offense in a dressed up other style.
Yeah.
You know, so that's why when they went down 14-0, it was like, oh, Like
Hence my tweet that people got mad at. It was 21-7. And I'm like, guys, this team is not built to play catch up.
No. And to their credit, like I said, I thought it was impressive that they even got to 21-19.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty impressive. And they had to, use some trickery with the fake punt. But, I don't think this is going to be the case next year.
Right.
I'm not saying they're going to turn into, a 40-point per game offense overnight, but, they have a tight end now, Justin Jolly coming in from UConn, who should be a permanent part of the passing game. Jonathan Paylor will take some of those plays and pressure, and more importantly, maybe the hits that Kevin Concepcion took. I don't think people realized how often Kevin, would come out, come back in, come out, come back in the last 4 games, because he's 180 pounds. And when 180-pound guys get hit by 270-pound guys, it hurts. Jonathan Paylor will take some of that pressure off. Keenan Jackson was a terrific addition, not just because they stole him away from UNC, but because he's a great possession wide receiver. He knows how to work the sideline. He knows how to catch 3rd and 8 passes. He knows how to get, do things in the end zone. Now, obviously, they're freshmen, Paylor and Keenan Jackson, but they should be freshmen who contribute. Yeah. I'm not saying they're going to put up the numbers that KC had, because that was a very rare situation. But
if you look on the screen, if you're watching on YouTube, this is Virginia's offense from 2021, Robert and I, where they had 3 guys in Tavian Wicks, Keaton Thompson, and Billy Kemp, who were receivers. Thompson was a little bit of a gadget guy, their Concepcion, if you will. Wicks, 57 catches, 1,200 yards. Thompson, 77 catches, almost 1,000 yards. Kemp, 75 catches, 740 yards. 9, 2, and 6 on the touchdowns. And then you see Jelani Woods, the tight end, had nearly 600 yards and 8 touchdowns. So the template is there for them. They have the play call there. This shouldn't be a mystery next year. The only thing I would caution some people and some State fans who have texted me, it's like, you understand next year Kevin's not going to have the same type of statistical year, because they're going to have other options, which is that's a good thing to have.
No, and I think you hit it on the nail. I mean, you want to spread the ball around. You want defenses to be guessing.
Yeah.
And, those numbers are why I just didn't think Brendan Armstrong had any chance of being a 2021 Brendan Armstrong. It's just they don't have these type of weapons.
Players around him. Yeah.
Wicks is with the Packers, I believe. Thompson made one of the XFL type leagues. He was a converted quarterback. He was a terrific player for Virginia after transferring in from Mississippi State. Billy Kemp got hurt in 2022. That was a big blow, for the post-Deny era, Brendan Armstrong era. He's not, and then transferred to Nebraska. Henry, for a 3rd receiver, those are pretty good, pretty solid numbers for a 3rd receiver. And then Jelani Woods was 6'7", 240 and got drafted by the Colts. So, I mean, big difference. So, I think next year, Jordan Waters from Duke will be a pounded between the tackles back. That is perfect for this offense. It takes the pressure off of Kendrick Raphael, who, probably should not have had the role that he had this year, but that's what happens when Jordan Houston leaves after 4 games, and when Michael Allen leaves before the end of the season, and DeMarcus Jones gets hurt, and other things just happen the wrong way. So, Kevin shouldn't have to play as much running back next year.
Yeah.
So, and then as you show this, I mean, this is
the reason for the other schedule, isn't it? This is not in the order that the games will be played, but they play. Yeah, I mean, they open with Western Carolina. Their home schedule next year is one of the worst I've ever seen, most boring I've ever seen. But if you can handle boring, if you can handle the shoulds, if you can handle success, then NC State will be in position next year to do something that they haven't done. And maybe a big part of it is the schedule. I'm not going to lie to you. If you're watching on the YouTubes, you can see they play Tennessee week 2 in Charlotte, and then I believe Louisiana Tech and NIU are already set for the next 2 weeks. The rest of the ACC schedule is they play Cal, Clemson, Georgia Tech, and Carolina on the road, and then they get Duke, Stanford, Syracuse, and Wake at home. Wake is in turmoil. Syracuse is in turnover. Stanford has not been the same in the last 3 years. Duke has a new coach who can't coach football. And then, Georgia Tech will be they were a feisty team this year. Carolina is Carolina. Clemson going there is always going to be tough. Cal can be feisty, but that's going to be a game where NC State has better players than they do. If the ACs, if they can, this is a schedule that's set up for them to at least play for the ACC championship, at least.
If they don't get to 10 wins with that schedule, it's going to be a little bit of a wait. This is the schedule. And, I actually think the schedule is so watered down next year that there's going to be a point in time where Pac fans are going to call the disrespect card because they aren't going to understand why they aren't ranked appropriately.
Right.
Because they're going to be like, wait a minute, we have all these wins. Why aren't we ranked?
Particularly if that Clemson game ends up being later in the season. It normally isn't. But if they have to plow through some of these, mediocre teams and if they beat Tennessee,
I think Georgia Tech is
going to see it when they beat Tennessee, by the way.
I like Georgia Tech. I think they could be sneaky good. I watched their game in Central Florida.
They're feisty. They're a feisty team.
Yeah, they have quick guys. They don't have big guys on offense at the skill spots, running back, receiver, but they're quick. They make plays. Their quarterback is good. But when the debate is, between Georgia Tech, UNC, or Duke as the third toughest opponent, or whatever you want to say, it's to me that's very telling. I think one of the nice things with some of the bowl games now is that you can get a sneak peek at a lot of these teams for next year. I know you probably were all about DVRing Northern Illinois' bowl game.
Sure. Sure. No, I will watch Tennessee though. I'll give you credit for that.
Well, the Nico thing is,
I have money on Iowa, but that's
Nico thing is fascinating because you imagine you're this touted quarterback who everybody thinks is a surefire pro. An absolute surefire pro. He's from California. Everyone, jumped on that he got $2 million to go to Tennessee bandwagon, and I don't doubt it. And you're making your first start against a defense like Iowa. And it's a fascinating deal. The only younger quarterback that could have brought in a more TV rating probably than Nico, and I wouldn't begin to totally pronounce his last name, is if Arch Manning were starting for Texas.
Right.
It's the perfect script, and you talk about guys making interesting decisions. Joe Milton will probably get drafted.
Maybe.
But, for him to just basically say peace out, like he did, it was a fascinating decision there. But it goes back to what you were talking about with Payton Wilson. I think all these guys are just petrified, or people around them are petrified that they might get hurt, which then will affect their working out for the NFL draft. And then that affects their draft status. And it's I always point to Stephon Marbury as the groundbreaking player in NBA draft, where he made it acceptable for point guards to go pro after a freshman year. Then there was a point where it was acceptable to be drafted outside the lottery. Then it became acceptable that it was okay if you went in the late 20s.
Right.
Now guys are like, hey, man, second round pick, I'm up. I'm out. Tercavian Smith, I'm out. They don't even end up getting drafted. But I'm sure Tercavian, I don't know what the right decision is for some of these guys. I think in the end, it will work out for Payton Wilson. I don't think losing.
Yeah, I think so too. He needs to be healthy. He needs to work out. Those are all good things for him. I thought it was unusual.
Do it. We saw Kevin Harmon do it. We saw Jermaine Pratt do it. I'm sure there's been a few others that have slipped my brain, but now I think it's a little extreme when like 20 FSU guys are doing it. Then I think it becomes my buddies are doing it, so I might as well too.
Yeah. That might be Milton too. So many of the Tennessee guys are not. So
I could make an NIL joke that maybe the checks stop cashing in December. I don't.
Who knows?
Who knows? But he basically went peace out.
Yep. Our
And
checks
now-
are good for 2024, JC.
Mhm.
And I appreciate you taking some time here the last few weeks on Law of the Wolf. And again, if you haven't already, subscribe. It's right there. The button's right there. It's super easy. Little thumbs up. Give us a little comment. If you haven't already, followed us on all of your different podcast platforms, Apple, the Spotify, the Googles, you name it. We're there. 5 stars only. Positive vibes only. Happy New Year to you. And we'll be back in 2024 for some more Law of the Wolf.
It ain't for soft people.